as you read and learn and experience and all those things, you then have to figure out who you are. You can't go try to be somebody else.
Absolutely.
I couldn't be Tom Landry. I couldn't be Grant Taft. I couldn't be Dick McPherson or Lee Tressel. I had to figure out who I was. And the more knowledge you get thrown in, to your mind, and the more experience you get to working with players. I was just at an event today. The head of the State of Ohio superintendent of the high school systems was a kid that played for me in 1976. It was like a blur that here we were, almost 50 years ago, I was coaching that guy, and here he was, the head of all the superintendents. And it's those relationships that you build with all the guys you coach and all the guys you coach with and all the guys you coach for. You have to really be an intentional listener, absorb it all, and then you figure out who you are.
Welcome to Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. Each episode pulls back the curtain on the coaching profession, spotlighting voices from every level of the game and offering lessons and insights for your own path. But first, a word from CoachComm.
When the game's on the line, your play call can mean the difference between winning and losing. Don't let poor communication cost you the game. For 35 years, CoachComm has been the trusted leader in coaching communication, delivering solutions with unmatched sound quality, performance, and durability. That's why thousands of coaches in high schools across the country trust CoachComm. You put in the hours to prepare. Make sure your communication delivers when it counts. CoachComm, giving coaches the ultimate competitive edge. Visit CoachComm.com to learn more.
Follow Inside the Headset on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show. We drop new episodes each week, so hit that follow button and never miss a moment. Now, let's get inside the headset.
Coach Tressel, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Mario. I'm excited to be on with the AFCA. This is awesome. This brings me back to my old school.
That's right. Well, it's an honor and a privilege to kind of share this platform with you. When you think about, as a young coach, I mean, you were one of the guys that you looked at and said, hey, I want to do that one day. So never thought I'd be able to kind of share this with you. So super excited about it myself. But before we dive into your coaching journey, I did want to ask you about kind of a current thing that you have going on. Let's talk about Team Tressel Fitness Challenge. I know that's something that you're super excited about. Over 700 high schools there in the state of Ohio. Almost 200,000 students, if not that, at the point in time, are involved in this. Tell us about it, what inspired the initiative, and kind of who you're working with on this deal.
Yeah, I've had a varied career, a checkered past, if you will, with a lot of coaching, a lot of administration, and I was happily retired after 48 years of higher education. And then the governor asked me if I would join him to take the position of lieutenant governor after our lieutenant governor became a U.S. senator. And because I thought so highly of our governor and the state of Ohio has been great to me, I said, what the heck, it's time to serve. And one of the things that the governor has me working on is education and workforce and all those things. But another thing that he said is, we need to challenge the youth of our state, to get more active, get off their screens, get off the couch, get out and play, get out and exercise, think about what you eat, think about how you sleep, all those things. And he said, so why don't you just go figure something out type thing. And so I got together with some of my former players and some educators and principals and whatnot. And we said, well, we're going to have a fitness challenge. And Teddy Ginn Jr., who played for us at Ohio State and then played 14 years in the NFL, I asked him if he'd be my fitness captain, my challenge captain, and join me. So they had a little bit younger person, that the kids could relate to. And so we just took off and created a workbook for them. We asked schools if they'd like to opt in. And as you said, we have over 700 schools that are taking part, grades 4 through 8. And about just under 200,000 students, and we've been out getting them excited about being active, eating right, sleeping right. We've had a lot of our former players adopt a school, so they go in there and they hype them up and so forth. And so it's been a lot of fun, and it's a little bit kind of after that old President's Fitness test that there used to be.
Yeah.
And then that kind of faded away. And I know President Trump has talked about bringing it back. And so we wanted to get a little ahead of the curve. We've been working on this. And so it's been a lot of fun. It's almost like every place we go in Ohio, we go to many, many middle schools and elementary schools and whatnot. And it's a little bit like an Ohio State pep rally going on. And, but it's been a lot of fun. And I've never coached 4th to 8th graders. I had all college kids my whole career. But it's been fun working with those kids. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just one last thing on that. Obviously, you've had the opportunity to play in some of the biggest games you can play in the sport of football, the national championships and things like that. When you go to school, like you said, you hadn't coached at that age group. What's rewarding for you, though? What are some of the things that you've seen that's been like, dang, this is pretty cool?
One of the coolest things is when Teddy and I go to a school, or I go to one alone, or he goes to one. It's fun to see that the kids feel as if, wow, this is neat. You care about us. Mm-hmm. You cared enough to come to our school and talk about what you think is important. And just like in coaching in general, I think, once kids know you care about them and you want to do good things with them, they're excited and proud and kids love to have fun. So it's been a lot of fun showing them how much we care about it.
Absolutely. Now, kind of dive into our normal meat and potatoes of the podcast. Typically, the first question we always ask every coach we get on is, when did you know you wanted to be a part of this great game?
It's interesting. My father was a long-time high school coach, and then he was a Division III coach. And I grew up on campus. I was the youngest of 3 boys. My 2 older siblings went into education as they went to college, and right near the end of my high school career, I was tied up playing football, basketball, baseball. I was a kid. And my guidance counselor said, well, what would you like to do the rest of your life? I said, gosh, I don't know. I'd like to play football, baseball, basketball, and he said, well, you need to start thinking about that. And so I started, looking at my brothers, looking at what impact my father had in being at Division III. He was the athletic director. He was the head football coach. He taught a full load of classes. He was an assistant coach in an Olympic sport. And, we lived on campus. We had players at our house all the time. And I said, well, shoot, I'd like to do what my dad and my brothers do. So after graduating from college, I sent hundreds of letters out to universities with the idea of getting my master's degree out of the way, and then go back and coach high school football and teach mathematics and live happily ever after. I got 3 letters back out of my hundreds that I sent. I got a letter back from Stanford, and from Ohio to Stanford seemed like it was in another continent. So I didn't follow that one. I got a letter back from Joe Paterno at Penn State, and I got a letter back from the University of Akron. So I went and interviewed both of those places, and I was dead set. I was going to go be a Nittany Lion. I was going to go with Joe Paterno. And my dad begged to differ, and he said, you're going to go to the University of Akron with Coach Dennison, and you're going to get to do a lot more. It's a smaller staff. You're going to get some responsibility. I think that's the best thing for you. And I said, oh, no, Dad, I want to go to Penn State. I would. They got an indoor practice field. They got, at that time, 80,000 people in their stadium. And he said, no, you're going to Akron. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got to work with Jim Dennison and spent a year as a GA there. And by good fortune, we only had 4 coaches on the staff, 2 on offense, 2 on defense, plus the head coach. And one of our offensive guys left. And Coach Dennison asked me if I wanted to apply for the open position. And so I got to spend 4 great years at the University of Akron, and we were Division II at the time. And it was a great experience. I played Division III, and then I got to coach Division II. And then I had a chance to go with Coach Reed at Miami of Ohio, which was still in Ohio, but it was at the other end of the state. So I felt like I was going a long way from home.
Right.
And then after a couple years there, Coach McPherson took over at Syracuse and invited me to go to Syracuse with him, which was a very valuable experience because both Coach Dennison and Coach Reed, I joined a staff that was already intact. When I went to Syracuse, I got to see the building of a staff and a program from day one, which was a tremendous experience. I learned so much with Coach McPherson. And then Coach Earl Bruce was the head coach at Ohio State, and he had noticed I'd been in recruiting in Ohio, and I was getting visits out of some guys that Ohio State was interested in. He said, I can't have an Ohioan coming in here and stealing Ohio players. And so he hired me there at Ohio State and spent 3 great years with Coach Bruce. And then I got my first chance to be a head coach at Youngstown State.
Now, before we kind of hop into that early experience at Youngstown State as a head coach, those first couple years, obviously very transformative for anybody in any profession, but very much so in the coaching profession. In hindsight, getting that advice from your dad, because I mean that Penn State logo is pretty cool, right? And all the bells and whistles that come with it. How advantageous was it for you to get that experience where you're wearing multiple hats at a Division II school? You're doing a lot of stuff, plus the GA roles, plus all the GA duties. How important was that when it was all said and done?
Well, in hindsight, I look back and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because I got to recruit a little bit because we only had 4 coaches. I got to be the strength coach, and I'm not a big strength guy, but we didn't have a strength coach. Right. I got to work with the special teams. I got to help with the quarterbacks. I got to do the scouting. I got to, go get the McDonald's for the other coaches when it was lunchtime. I got to do everything, and I got to sit there and absorb from all those veteran coaches.
Right.
And Coach Dennison was one of the best I've ever been around at the whole mental approach to the game. And I learned so much from him. But my dad used to always say, and I've said to many young coaches along the way, there's the value of responsibility is so big. Mm-hmm. The more responsibility you can earn, the more experiences you have, the faster you'll grow. And so I used to tell my coaches all the time, it's not where you coach, it's with whom and what responsibility do you have. And so in hindsight, that was the greatest. My dad, once again, listen to your dad, because, wisdom, is a good thing.
That's right. That's right. Now, speaking of listening to your dad, obviously, through your time growing up all the way through college, that was the voice you were hearing. That was your head coach. That was probably where some of your initial coaching philosophies came from. But as you had this opportunity to kind of bounce around and see these different guys and see they don't say the exact same thing your dad said, or, maybe look at some stuff absolutely just totally different. How rewarding was that early in your career to just kind of get some different experiences under some different people?
Oh, no question. I didn't even know what I was learning from my dad. Yeah. You're just doing it kind of observing. And when you're a player, you're playing, and you're not thinking about being a coach. But then when you get to go and work around head coaches, you get to learn from the assistant coaches. I think what you do, and maybe it's subliminally, but you pick the things that really meant a lot to you and that made sense to you, and then you kind of store those in your little work box. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the next head coach and the next group of assistants, and you listen and absorb and so forth. And all the while, and one thing I would really urge the coaches that are listening, as I used to spend a lot of time reading about coaches, because you can't meet every coach. Yeah. So I read everything John Wooden ever wrote about coaching basketball. I read Bill Walsh. I read Grant Taft. I read Rick Pitino. Whatever, Don Shula. Anything I could read. About the game of football. I tried to read, along with listening closely to the assistant coaches I was with and the head coaches I worked for. And one thing that I kind of look back on it and I think is valuable is that as you read and learn and experience and all those things, you then have to figure out who you are. Mm-hmm. You can't go try to be somebody else.
Absolutely.
I couldn't be Tom Landry.
Right.
I couldn't be Grant Taft. I couldn't be Dick McPherson or Lee Tressel. I had to figure out who I was. And the more knowledge you get thrown in, to your mind, and the more experience you get to working with players. I was just at an event today. The head of the State of Ohio superintendents of the high schools, of the school systems, was a kid that played for me in 1976. It was like a blur that here we were, almost 50 years ago, I was coaching that guy, and here he was, the head of all the superintendents. And it's those relationships that you build with all the guys you coach and all the guys you coach with and all the guys you coach for. You have to really be an intentional listener, absorb it all, and then you figure out who you are.
Yeah. Oh, you kind of, I was going to segue to your first year at Youngstown State, and you kind of said a really good thing. I think I'm going to kind of reformat my question here. You talked about, you read these books and you see these people, and you're putting it in that little box you referenced. Over your, what is it? Let me do the math real quick. Your time at Youngstown State, 13, 14 years.
15 years.
15 years.
15.
Year 1 to year 15, how much did who you were as a ball coach change? Just, I'm really trying to see how you walked in as a first-time head coach, because I don't think you even coordinated at that point. Did you?
No.
Yeah. And so,
No.
I mean, you kind of skipped over the 50 guys to straight to the 100 guys. And, I'm sure you had to learn and grow on your own, even through the success and maybe some failures in there. I don't quite know some of those parts of it, but how did you grow in those 15 years and kind of change who you were?
I think when you get opportunities, you start thinking about, what it is you've learned, and then how you would like to be your own coach, your own person.
Yeah.
One of the first things I did when I became the head coach at Youngstown State, I went down to Waco, Texas, which is probably where you're sitting.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I sat with Grant Taft, and I sat and talked with Grant Taft. At the same time on that trip, I went to a place that was, I think, in Waco or somewhere near Waco. I'd never been to Texas in my life. Was a place called Success Motivation Institute, because I wanted to get a little bit of outside of the game of football, organizational. I want to have success for my players. Of course, I want to win games and all that. And then on my way back to Dallas to fly home, I stopped and saw Tom Landry. And so I'm ready to go. I'm eager. I've learned all this. I've spent 11 years as as an assistant coach. And then our first year, we were 2-9.
Okay.
And I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
I put everything to work that I thought I'd learned, but until you do it,
yeah,
and until you develop those relationships with your players, until you develop the continuity on your staff, but you keep learning, and probably one of the most valuable things that happened to us at Youngstown State was in our first 10 games, we were 1-9, but we thought we had built good relationships, and we hadn't won games. But just by chance, our last game was against our rival, which was the University of Akron, 40 miles away. And they were 8-2. We were 1-9, and we ended up upsetting them. And it kind of was a little bit of proof. And I think it's important that you really point toward breakthroughs. And at some point in time, you need to get a breakthrough. But we learned so much that first year. In fact, I'll tell you, Mario, what I did was, after I assessed that first year at 2-9, I said, I'm not sure we have enough experience on our staff. So I went out and got 2 high school coaches and convinced them to come and be part-time coaches with us after school, because they had been head coaches. They were older than most of us were. They had gray hair and wisdom. Okay. And from that year on at Youngstown State, we were pretty good.
That's right.
And I think a lot of it was the lessons we learned the first year, but bringing that maturity on our staff to just help us understand young people a little bit better. And, but we never stopped reading. One thing I did every year at Youngstown State as the head coach, I went and visited somewhere for a week, whether it was Florida State, for a week, or University of Washington, or Air Force, or Ohio State, or Michigan, or Colorado State. I was all over the country 1 week trying to study everything. offense, defense, special teams, weight room, academics, community service, all those things, because you never stop learning. And I thought that was an important part of our growth at Youngstown State.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting stuff there. I do want to follow up on year 1, 2-9, and you follow it up with going to hire some experienced coaches that are older than you, because I can imagine what you're 35, 36 at this point.
I was 33.
33. Yeah. So you're 33. Probably the most intimidating thing is to get a bunch of older guys in there to kind of tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. And maybe you can put your pride aside and kind of take that. But like, you didn't feel threatened by that. How do you have the foresight to, especially, I can only imagine with that door closed behind you in that office after you're 1-9 going into week 11, I'm sure you had some crazy thoughts going on. How do you have the foresight to say, hey, you know what? I need to call these guys. I need to put my pride aside and get some experience in there.
Yeah, I think, suffering is healthy. And we were suffering, and suffering brings you to your knees a little bit, and it's like, hey, I guess I didn't know as much as I thought I did. I did think we were improving. Mm-hmm. We just weren't winning.
Yeah.
And like anything that you do, I think self-scout is important. Mm-hmm. And, I just thought, you know what? We don't have many coaches. Some of them we have are very young. What could we do to make a more complete staff? And, it's you have to admit what you aren't.
Yeah.
Everyone likes to talk about what they are, but you have to admit what you aren't. And these two guys were from Youngstown, Ohio. None of my staff was. My staff was, maybe some of them were from Ohio, but they, cities have their own little culture and their own little, things. And I thought, not only do these guys bring experience, but they're from Youngstown, Ohio. They give us a little credibility that, these two good high school coaches would come, and coach at the university. And so again, looking in the mirror is an important thing, and not with rose-colored glasses, but with, hey, where can we get better?
Yeah, looking at the ugly truths, right?
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that you said is you visited those staffs. I'm just out of curiosity. You did it every single year. What do you take away from it? Obviously you see a lot of stuff. You probably see a lot of stuff that you don't do. That's a good idea, but it might not fit at Youngstown State. Like, how did you decipher that information that you accumulated at these places?
A lot of the places that I chose to visit, and I went on my own because we couldn't afford to take the whole staff and all that kind of thing. And, I chose where I went based upon what I think we needed to learn. For instance, I went to Florida State. I called Coach Bowden. I didn't know Coach Bowden, but I said, hey, I'm 1AA coach. Love to come down for spring practice. Is that allowable? He said, yeah, you watch whatever you want, watch film, get to know our coaches. The reason I wanted to go to Florida State, of course, Florida State was doing great, but they were an independent school. They weren't in a conference. We weren't in a conference. They really couldn't at that time compete with the SEC for student athletes because they were independent and the SEC had a league. And so they ended up maybe taking some guys that, had some flaws, whether it was, they weren't quite developed yet, or maybe they weren't as good as students, or, whatever. And that's what we had to do, because we sat there in Ohio with 7 other Division I schools, like Miami, Bowling Green, Ohio University, University of Akron, Kent State, and so forth, that we couldn't beat them in recruiting. They were in the next division up. And so we didn't always get the first choice. So I thought, Florida State's done an amazing job being independent, not having a conference, not being able to be the lead dog in recruiting. I'm going to go see what they do. What's their magic? And it was especially important to bring back some of the things they did outside of the X's and O's, because, you have to do what your players are capable of. You can't just go study somebody and say, I'm going to do it like the Green Bay Packers. Well, you might not have who the Green Bay Packers have.
Right.
But there's other things, there's how do you help your kids academically? How do you help them from a community service? How do you help them mature and grow as young men? How do you how do you practice? What's the setup of your practice? Doesn't matter what plays you run, but and one of the things I took from Florida State that early on in my career was in spring practice, they went ones on ones. It was a war. Mm. And I had grown up with some coaches that always went like ones on twos.
Yeah.
And we weren't tested as well. And then all of a sudden we got to the real games. It was like, whoo, this is a different speed. and so I thought, you know what? That makes sense. Yeah. Florida State, they're going hard at each other. So when I went back and we started our spring practice, everyone was shocked. They were going like ones on ones, twos on twos. It was like a game. And, just little things that you pick up. One of the things I picked up at Florida State, which would probably never be accepted today, but they always wanted their kids dying to come back to the facility and not be like, oh, I got to go back to the facility. Oh, I got to go work out. So in the summer, they worked out Monday through Thursday, and every weekend was a 3-day weekend. And what they said was our guys were dying to get back to the facility on Monday. And so when I got back, I said, hey, guys, you know what? Let's give this a try. Mm. Well, we did. And you know what? Our guys would do no different. I mean, if we would have changed that now, physiologically, all the strength coaches and all the folks, would say, oh, no, you got to have a Wednesday rest day and you got to recovery and all that. And our point was, you know what? The mind is the most important thing. And the mind needs a 3-day week to recover, 3-day weekend.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. Now, honestly, when I got to Ohio State and, all these guys, NFL combine bound and all this, they were brainwashed that they need Wednesdays off. And so I didn't fight it. I didn't say, well, this was great for us at Youngstown State, but it was the right thing for us. And mentally, our guys thought it was a winning formula. Ohio State's guys, when we got there, thought, no, we needed Wednesdays off. We're going to work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And so there's nothing that's absolute, but you have to figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic right there because, if you kind of hear some guys speak, you'll hear some head coaches even now say, we put a barbershop in the locker room. We put video games there. We want them to be there all the time. And obviously This logic is, kind of away from that. But what you want is for them to want to be there, not just be there because they got to be there. And I think that's
because it's convenient, or because they can get their haircut.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very interesting perspective.
And we couldn't afford a barbershop, So.
Oh yeah, it was a different time at that point in time.
Right.
Yeah. Now, spoiler alert. Obviously, you started off 2-9, but go on to rattle off 4 national championships at the Division I AA level. And ultimately leads you to an opportunity at your next stop at Ohio State. Just talk a little bit about that transition. This is kind of the first time that, obviously you're stepping up to be an FBS head coach, but this is a big transition and interview process and all that kind of stuff. Kind of what led up to that job and you taking it ultimately?
It was interesting. Timing is so important. There's more good coaches than there are jobs. Mm-hmm. And you have to be lucky sometimes. And timing has to be right. And Ohio is a very proud football state, like Texas is and like Florida is and like Georgia is. And so the head coach before me at Ohio State, John Cooper, had excellent success. But he wasn't from Ohio. And you know how people are about,
Yeah.
And so I never felt like he was accepted quite to the level he should have been, because I thought John was great. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He did an excellent job. He was always good to all of us other coaches that were from smaller levels. I thought he was great. But, the fan base and all that kind of stuff, they have their biases or whatever. And so really what they were looking for after John stepped down was, we want to get a guy from Ohio. Well, we had just been there for 15 years, knew every high school coach in the state, had a lot of success, those kinds of things. And, just by chance, we got in the final 3. The first guy that interviewed turned it down, which sure helped because they offered him the job. And then it was down to 2 of us. And, I was lucky enough to get the job. And But, not unlike when we went to Youngstown State, our first year at Ohio State, we were 7-5.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's 7-5 doesn't do it at Ohio State.
Yeah.
That's not what they're looking for. But I think the same thing was occurring. We were beginning to develop relationships. We were beginning to trust one another. We were beginning to get a feel for we could really be good together, our staff and our players. And we were fortunate in that first year, not unlike our first year at Youngstown State. We won the rival game on the last game of the year. And when you win the rival game, that's worth about 10 wins, right?
Yeah. All is well at that point. Yeah.
All is well, and they forget about the 5 losses and all that kind of thing. And so, again, I think it's important to know that you're going to need a breakthrough. You're going to need to do something special and get your guys thinking about, who knows when it'll be, but you need to come up with that breakthrough. And we were fortunate at Ohio State to have that breakthrough in the opening year.
Yeah. Now, this is a high profile job in comparison to Youngstown State in its own right. I know there's Youngstown loyalists that's a whole high profile job, but what were some of the differences in your approach, or did you try to do it like you did it at Youngstown State?
You know what? Other than having to travel more nationally, because we had alumni all over the country and they wanted you to get out and meet people and all that. Other than that, it was really no different at all. We had certain things that we had a thing called the Blocko of life. Well, back at Youngstown, it was the wheel of life. And we had certain things that we wanted to make sure our kids grew spiritually, our kids grew academically, our kids, health habits were important. Obviously, football goals were important. Family was important. Community service was important. And so the exact same foundational block that we had at Youngstown State is exactly what we did at Ohio State. Sure, our guys were thinking about the NFL probably more than our Youngstown State guys.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem, once we got to know each other and trust one another, and they knew we cared about them as people,
mm-hmm.
and yes, we wanted them to reach their football goals and we wanted to win games, but once they knew we cared about them as humans, and that we would do all we could do for their future, it was no different coaching at Youngstown State and Ohio State.
Yeah. Now, I would like to ask this question because I'm sure you would agree there's a major difference in talent, right? In regards
mm-hmm.
to when you step up to that level, you can get that kid from Florida now. You can with the budget, you probably can go recruiting places that you never really were placed before,
right.
you never really recruited before. How for somebody that was so Ohio based like yourself, how did you adapt to the recruiting landscape at that time? Which I don't know quite what it was over that decade, but how did you adjust to getting down to Texas and these other recruitable, recruiting rich areas? Like how did you formulate a recruiting plan, I guess?
Well, it was interesting. When we were at Youngstown State, we had a thing called the State of Youngstown, and it was about an hour and a half around, and it included Pittsburgh, which is good football, Western PA, and it included Cleveland, Akron, Canton, Massillon, good football. And then we went to Florida.
Mm.
So we recruited the heck out of Florida because
Wow.
back then there wasn't UCF, there wasn't USF, there wasn't FIU, there wasn't FAU in the early 80s, mid 80s. It wasn't until 1990 that UCF became 1AA. They used to be Division II back then. So we had a lot of success recruiting Florida throughout our 15 years at YSU. And one thing the kids in Florida knew, if Florida, Miami, and Florida State didn't recruit them, they were getting on a plane to go somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
And they didn't care, and so we had a ton of Florida guys. And so when we got to Ohio State, we kind of opened up our area and obviously recruited all of Ohio. We didn't recruit all of Ohio when I was at Youngstown State, but we recruited all of Ohio, Pittsburgh to Chicago, that kind of thing, down to Louisville, and then Florida. because we had great relationships there. And then as time went on, it broadened out a little bit more, but we always felt like it was important to recruit where we had relationships, where they trusted us, where we had coached someone before. And, that was kind of the way we did it. Now, after our 10 years at Ohio State, and when Coach Meyer came in and now Coach Day, they've been able to broaden it out even more. So you see, they have a lot of West Coast guys. They have some Texas guys. We had a few Texas guys. We had 2 or 3 Texas starters, but they've become more of a national profile team, and we were probably 70% Ohio still when we were there at Ohio State, and 30% national. It's probably 50-50 now.
Yeah.
But growth does that.
Absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of people kind of sleep on when you talk recruiting. You talk California, Texas, Florida, the usual suspects, the Deep South. I mean, I had one opportunity when I was at Davidson College to go out to Ohio and recruit Ohio and Pennsylvania. And I mean, I was just struck with the amount of talent that's kind of running through there. I think a lot of people don't really recognize that. But yeah, definitely a talent-rich area there. Now, you mentioned Coach Day. Obviously, you have your affiliation to Ohio State even to this day, right? People think about you a lot of times when they think about Coach Tressel. They think about your Ohio State times and your Youngstown State times. Sitting in that chair now, how cool was it to see them kind of achieve that success that everybody's striving for in today's college football?
It was a lot of fun. Last year at this time, I was retired, so I could go down to practice.
Oh, wow.
I could, I had some time. I just finished 48 years of working, and so I had a little bit more time, and I had gotten to know Coach Day over the years, and he was always had the welcome mat out for all the former coaches and former Buckeyes and so forth. And so it was fun to watch their growth. And like most situations, sometimes when you have hardship, you really grow. And when we lost our rival game last year, then went on that 4-game terror, you could tell that pain, which sometimes pain helps.
That's right.
Moved us on, and to see them win the first ever 12-team playoff. And I was talking to them all along the season because, we had a lot of those kind of things in 1AA. That's all we lived was 4-game playoffs. They picked 16 teams, and, so we went to the final game 8 times. So we've been through, that thing quite a bit. And so I kept preaching to them, got to be healthy when we hit the playoffs, got to be healthy, got to be lucky to be healthy sometimes, those kinds of things.
Yep. But
mentally, it's different. It's not like, regular season ends and you got a long time to get ready for a 4-team playoff, or back in my day, it was BCS. It was just top 2 teams met, 40 days later after the season. And so he did a masterful job of keeping his guys healthy, keeping them focused, even after the disappointment of losing out and not being able to play for the Big Ten championship. He kept them together, had them learn their lessons from that. And then, you can see this year it's just continuing. He's got a great football team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, after your time at Ohio State, you took a job with the Indianapolis Colts, I believe, as a consultant. So this is kind of the beginning of you stepping away and doing some more very interesting things for yourself, who had, just been on the sidelines strictly for the last, 20, 30 years at that point in time. What was it like to kind of step in that role? What were some of your responsibilities as a consultant in the NFL?
It was interesting. After our time at Ohio State ended, it was kind of a time of, oh man, what's gonna, what are we gonna do? And I remember my mentor, and I would say to all your listeners and so forth, you better have someone in your life that'll tell you the truth, even if you're the Ohio State head coach. And you think you're a hot shot, and I happened to have a guy named Dr. Patrick Spurgeon, who was longtime English professor at Georgia Southern, and then helped Irk Russell build the Georgia Southern program there when they won all those 1AA championships. And he became my mentor. He became that guy that could close the door and tell me he didn't like the way I handled the press conference, or hey, I'm not sure you're practicing hard enough, or hey, you're practicing too hard, or whatever. And I remember after our time ended, I never forget him looking me in the eyes and saying, "Hey, you do know that your greatest impact is ahead of you." And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's tough for an Ohio boy to think that being the head coach of Ohio State, if there's anything beyond that, more impactful than that." And he said, "Look at me again." He said, "Your greatest impact is ahead of you if you believe that it is." He said, "That will be up to you." And so that was like a challenge. And, your mentor challenges you. Your mentor kind of calls you on the carpet. And so I decided after that I was going to kind of step away a little bit. And then Jim Caldwell from the Indianapolis Colts, one of the finest human beings I've ever been around, called me up and he said, "Hey, we're not going to have Peyton Manning this year. He's out for the season. We're not going to win many games. We'd like to win as many as we can. Would you come over and help?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I was thinking about, trying to figure out where I want to go in life." And he said, "Well, just come over on the weekends, do film study, during the week, and then come over on the weekends. And I want you to help me with game management and so forth." And it was a great experience. And it helped me realize this, that NFL probably wasn't my thing. I'm an educator. I realized that, I like to work with young people to help get them ready for the rest of their life. That's what I'd done for 30 some years before that. And that NFL experience helped cement that thought in my mind. And that's why I ended up going into higher education administration, that, I'm an educator.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in 2012, you go to the University of Akron as the Vice President of Strategic Engagement. So this might be the first time I've ever asked a question like this on the podcast. What interested you in that role? Like, obviously you kind of had the epiphany education, but the title itself, sounds
right.
extremely unique. You obviously have some familiarity from years ago at the university, but what intrigued you to kind of chase that?
Well, what's interesting is I had a number of small colleges asking me to interview for their presidency. And so I interviewed with a couple and was like, I don't know if I know enough about this. This is like foreign to me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the University of Akron president, Dr. Proenza, called me up and he said, "Hey, I heard you're interviewing for higher education jobs." And I said, "Well, yeah, I don't know that I'm ready for that, and certainly not ready to be a president." And he said, "Well, why don't you come here and be the vice president?" And I said, "Vice president? Vice president of what? I mean, what do you want me to do?" And he said, "I don't know. We'll figure that out." But, he said, "I've been here 12 or 13 years. I need fresh eyes. I need to, in my last few years, have someone that could come in and maybe give me a different vantage point. And you've had a lot of experiences at universities." And so that's how I ended up going to the University of Akron. And as fate would have it, after my second year at the University of Akron, Youngstown State had just lost a president who had only been there 6 months. And they were in kind of a state of like, what happened here?
Yeah.
And they just needed to bring back someone that the community knew and trusted and so forth. And I ended up being a college president. Never dreamed that would happen.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Now, interesting question on the way I'll phrase this here, but if you had to, if your life was a book up to this point and you had to name that chapter between that experience as vice president and president at Youngstown State, what would that chapter be called? How did that impact your life? What did you learn? What was those 4 years about?
I think it was a little bit of gratitude. When they got a hold of me and said, "Hey, look, we really are a little bit of a fragile state here. The community is a little fragile. We had 4 presidents in 5 years at Youngstown State and lost a little bit of confidence." And they said, we could really, even if you come for like 3 years, we could really use that steadying influence. That someone knew, that people knew you, they trust you, they know you love the place.
Yeah.
And so I think as I assessed, I would name that chapter gratitude. That I was kind of I went back there to let them know how much I appreciated that, they gave me that chance to get my first head coaching job and build that program. And it catapulted us to some extraordinary things at Ohio State. And so it was kind of my way to pay back, out of gratitude. And, we said we'd stay 3 years, and we ended up staying 9 because I tell people all the time, different kind of fun, but it was as fun as coaching. Again, you were working with kids. You were getting them ready for the rest of their lives. You were seeing the difference, you could make in their lives. You were making a difference in a community, just like you try to when you're coaching in a community. And now it was a much broader set of problems. In coaching, you got 100 guys and 12 coaches and everything pretty myopic. At a university, we had 12,000 students and 1,500 employees and 4 unions and teachers with faculty with tenure and stuff I'd never experienced. But it was just as much fun, and it was my chance to pay back, be grateful for what Youngstown State had allowed me to experience.
Now, I'm saying this as the director of coaching education at the AFCA. Education is clearly important to me, but something that's really apparent as I've had this opportunity to sit down with you here for the last 30, 45 minutes is education is important to you. And every stop that you've talked about, you kind of talked about what you learned and all those kind of things. And you would think for a 5-time national championship winner, you'll be talking about inside zone a little bit more, quarters, coverage, and all that kind of stuff. But, it comes down to education. So I want to ask this question. I got a feeling I know what you're going to say. I could be wrong, but, obviously coaching is this profession has changed dramatically. I'm talking specific at the collegiate level, with the NIL and the one-time transfers and, building a culture when a kid can leave at any point. I guess we just got this new window in, but, can leave year by year. What is one of those things that won't change about this profession, about coaching at the collegiate level?
I think your effort to build a team that appreciates one another, is it harder? Yes, because people, it can get up and go and they can worry more about themselves. But, in society, they can do that too. And you still have to build culture in society, which means you have to be fair to one another. You have to, do the best you can to have people have opportunities to grow and so forth. And so even though it's a little bit different situation, still the best team, I think of the last 2 national championship games, and I think of 2 years ago when Washington played Michigan. Both had very veteran teams. They had guys there 4 and 5 years. They had guys who clearly, knew what a team was about. Maybe not the 2 most talented teams in the country, but because they cared about one another and you could see they had that culture, they ended up playing for the championship. And then last year, that closeness of that team at Ohio State, which, they went through a lot of adversity, but they stayed close as a team and they had each other's back and they loved one another. And then Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman. Marcus had played for us at Ohio State, and I knew the type of team that he was building. I'd been up to visit with his team, and he was building it on a team knowing, yes, there's NIL and yes, there's portal and all that, but it's still the most important thing you can do is build that culture of caring about one another, loving one another. And it's harder, but, it's hard in society too.
That's right.
And so we've got to, that's never going to go away. And I guess the other one, Mario, I would tell you is you still have to block and tackle. It don't matter if there's a portal or an NIL or whatever, but you better block and tackle.
That's right. That won't change, right?
That won't change.
Yeah. So let me tell you something. This has been phenomenal. I appreciate your time. I want to kind of end this on one question because I've tapped into Coach Tressel and President Tressel, and I want to tap into a little bit of Lieutenant Governor Tressel. Obviously, he had this long career, been able to coach and been able to educate and lead and make tough decisions, all these things that you deal with as a coach and as a teacher and as an educator. How have you taken those lessons and kind of that previous life per se and applied it to your life now as a lieutenant governor, as you're dealing with so much pressure and building teams and making tough decisions?
It's interesting. You asked the question about what won't ever go away in the game of football, even though we have NIL and portal.
Yeah.
And that's made it harder, right? Well, we've got Ohio's a state of 12 million people, and it's hard. It's hard to build a team. We've got 7 or 8 cities. We've got a bunch of suburbs. We've got lots of rural areas. We have the east side of our state's Appalachian region. I mean, we've got a diverse set of things going on. And it's hard. It's hard to build a team, especially with a big outfit like that. And here's what I've learned, Mario, is that there's very few resources for lots of needs. And to build a team is you got to try to do the best you can with what you've got to serve the needs of everyone. And so I think clearly my time as a coach, trying to be a team builder, caring about everyone's future, caring about the needs, having an awareness of the difficulties people are going through and have a compassion for dealing with them. I think it served me well. I'm still learning. I've only been doing this 6 or 7 months. But it's not unlike when I went from coaching to being a president, going from being retired to being a lieutenant governor or president to being lieutenant governor. It's as much fun as anything else I've ever done. It's probably harder, again, because the magnitude is so much greater. But I think it's been healthy, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if my colleagues would agree with me on this, but I think it's been healthy for our cabinet and for our governor. And our governor, Mike DeWine, is a special guy. I mean, he cares about every single Ohioan. And I think bringing the old coach in there has been, kind of a new and different thing for the cabinet and for the governor's office. And so, I feel really good that we're working hard, just like we do as coaches, and trying to make a difference in people's lives. It's no different, different set of circumstances.
For sure.
But still the same outcomes you're seeking.
Amen, Coach. Well, hats off to you for your work. The Team Tressel Fitness Challenge sounds amazing. When I heard about that, we definitely want to have an opportunity to sit down and talk to you about it a little bit. So just appreciate you for all your efforts. Number one, kind of in your role where it really matters when it's all said and done. Helping people and leading people, and then what you did for the game. When Coach Bowl said we had the opportunity to hop on with you, I was ecstatic because your name resonates in this profession. So we appreciate what you've done.
Well, I remember when Coach Bowl was leaving Nebraska to go to North Dakota State, he came up to Ohio State and visited with us for 3 or 4 days.
Oh, yeah.
And because Nebraska was one of the places I visited when I was at Youngstown State. And Coach Bowl used to take care of me when I was this little 1AA coach. And now he was on his way to 1AA, and here I was at Ohio State. And that's there's so many great things about the game of football. Yeah. There's no game like it. The closeness of teammates, your colleagues and your staff members, your people that you learn from, the Craig Bowles of the world that took me in at Nebraska. And then when he wanted to come and learn, we took him in at Ohio State, and that, there aren't many businesses that do that.
No, yeah.
But our business does it.
As I was going to say, you don't see McDonald's sharing the Big Mac recipe with Burger King, right? It's just such a special place, man, just to be able to go and share and give back and pour back into each other.
Yep, no question. Well, I appreciate you, Mario. We need education, so keep this podcast rolling.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Coach. You have a great one.
All right, thank you.
When communication counts, trust the headsets trusted by the best. From high schools to the biggest college programs, CoachComm keeps coaches connected and teams prepared to win. Learn more at CoachComm.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, We'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.